Hey everyone, so if you don't know, my name is Shelby Champlin. My pronouns are they, them. And for this presentation and for the paper that I wrote, I chose someone to interview who I knew in her everyday life is stuck in the middle of hearing culture and deaf culture and trying to balance the two in a leadership role. So, first, I just want to give some background information that I think will help you to better understand one, why I chose this person, and two, why the values of deaf culture play a role for her, and maybe, like I have listed here, tell you some of those values so that you can better understand the things that I discussed from the interview as we go forward. So, some of the values of deaf culture are the use of American Sign Language, so ASL, information sharing, collectivism, deaf history, and storytelling. And again, this is not a comprehensive list. This is just a list of a few examples of the values of deaf culture, just to sort of give you a basic idea of what that looks like. So the person that I interviewed is a CODA, or a child of a deaf adult. So she actually has two deaf parents, but they were divorced when she was young. So she was mostly with her mom growing up, and she ended up, as the oldest of five children, being the one who interpreted for her mom a lot, which is actually pretty common for CODAs. Whoever is the oldest child tends to take on that role. It's not always true, but it is pretty common. But for her, she also took on a maternal figure role for her younger siblings. So being a CODA gave her firsthand knowledge of the challenges, but also the joys that are experienced in the lives of deaf people. So she is an employee of a school for the deaf, which is also called a residential school. And just a little bit of background about what that looks like. So historically, residential schools, which is a self-sufficient campus, so it's often a place that has several dorms. They have places to eat. They have several school buildings. Everything is there in one place. So these have historically been run by deaf individuals, but that is now starting to shift. And the school that she works for is actually now under complete hearing administration. So no one in those leadership or administrative roles is deaf. And so as a result of that, the values of deaf culture are slowly being pushed aside. And as she mentioned in the interview, deaf schools are no longer embracing deaf individuals as leaders, but are, quote, continuously pushing them to the bottom. So this is something that she is seeing and continues to see in her work at a school for the deaf. So as I mentioned, she is in a leadership role there. So she is now the interpreter supervisor at a state school for the deaf, as I mentioned. So that looks like, for her, she has 7, sometimes 8 staff interpreters working under her. And as the supervisor, she is also the person who is in contact with other administrators, like the principal, the vice principal, in this case, the DOS, the director of special education, those types of individuals at the school. And so as a CODA, as an interpreter, as someone who values deaf people, deaf culture, she is constantly trying to balance the two, hearing culture and deaf culture. And as a CODA, she holds a very different perspective than other hearing people on campus who may still value deaf culture, but have not lived with a deaf person. They've not grown up with deaf parents. So her experience is very unique and also lends a unique perspective as a leader. So here are some things that she actually talked about in the interview, that some qualities of hearing leadership versus deaf leadership, and why there are some conflicts and clashes happening between the two. So with hearing leadership, oftentimes leaders will be cordial to your face, but if they have any issues with you, they go directly to your supervisor, or if they're conducting evaluations, they will just mark it off on your evaluation. They'll follow up with an email, but they may not actually talk to you directly about what the issues are. Whereas for deaf leaders, they will speak to you directly, which is also a common characteristic of deaf people, is that they are very direct. So they will tell you exactly what you did wrong or what needs to improve, but at the same time, still build you up when they're giving you that feedback. For hearing leaders, they will often remain professional, even at the risk of losing personal connections. Whereas deaf leaders will connect with team members, instilling that collectivist culture. So the team members and colleagues, they'll get to know them on a personal level. Hearing leaders, they will often value the completion of tasks over the needs of the team. Whereas deaf leaders, it's the complete opposite. So they will value the needs of the team over what needs to get done. And these things, these differences, are where my interviewee, she finds herself right in the middle, trying to balance between these two and mitigate these conflicts that are happening because of the cultural differences. So as we wrapped up the as we wrapped up the interview, I asked about her advice for me, but also other future leaders. So first she said, remember how you got here and who helped along the way. So again, as I mentioned, instilling that collectivist mindset and maintaining that in the sense of deaf people got me here. I had language models, I had members of the deaf community who encouraged me to become an interpreter, who then encouraged me to become an interpreter educator, and it would not be possible without them to be where I am today. So I liked that advice. I like that she added that because I think we all have people who have helped us along the way. And just because we have success or we're in a leadership role doesn't mean that we can forget those people and what they did for us. She also talked about surrounding yourself with the leaders that you strive to emulate. So I feel very fortunate because I have a lot of leaders around me. So within my graduate program, I have leaders in my peers, but I also have leaders in my instructors, and also at my place of work. So I am an interpreter educator at a university, but I'm also the youngest member of the team. So I'm fortunate to have seasoned interpreters and also very experienced interpreter educators who have set very admirable expectations, but also have given me a way to achieve those expectations. She also said, don't forget the lived experiences of those you are leading. So this also stuck out to me because she talked about specifically in the face of COVID, how everything has shifted within her team. Some people are having medical issues as a result of having COVID. Some people are experiencing higher levels of mental health needs that may not have been as prominent in the past. And so that often looks like taking more time off or calling in sick or going to your supervisor and asking for advice quite often because you're not really sure of yourself. And so she talked about just remembering that they are going through a lot of things too, and that just because you may have a supervisory role above them, that they are still human beings that deserve grace and understanding. And the last thing she said was to be the one willing to do the hard stuff. So taking on the assignments that maybe no one else wants to do, or working with that person that really frustrates others, or sometimes that also means speaking up when no one else is, even when it is to your supervisors or your bosses. but maintaining those core values that you have can be difficult, but in the end, you know, you have to be the one that's going to do what's right. So, and that's what I learned from my interview.